All right, sweetheart. Go on. What's your call sign? Make it a good one. We've already got Coffee 6 in the room. The Combat Operations Center of Marine Tactical Air Command Squadron 28 held 32 people on the morning of May 7th, 2026. Lieutenant Colonel Brock Hearn stood at the front in service alphas, chest ribbons aligned, posture easy with the particular looseness of a man who had owned every room he entered for 19 years and saw no reason to question why that would change. The tiered seats curved toward a tactical display wall, cycling through sortie data in amber and white. The joint air debrief had been running 40 minutes. Hearn had spent 38 of them on Callsign rosters, moving through names in the practiced cadence of institutional authority. Coffee 6, Hammer Lead, Striker 2. Each name landed with the comfortable weight of a man who kept the score in a game only he was counting. Then he spotted the civilian woman in the back row. She was the only person in the room who was not in uniform, which meant his eyes found her the way eyes found anomalies in any visual field, not by looking for her, but by the automatic process of eliminating everything familiar and arriving at what remained. He noted the contractor lanyard. He noted the charcoal suit, the closed laptop, the tight regulation bun. He noted that she was sitting in the back row with the posture of someone who had decided the back row was exactly where she needed to be, and had not checked with anyone before deciding this. He noted that she had not moved in 40 minutes of debrief. He filed her as a civilian analyst from the Naval Safety Center, or a contractor firm, here as a formality. Present for procedural reasons, not operationally relevant. He was wrong about everything in that sentence. She sat alone at the end of the fourth tier, contractor lanyard around her neck, a slim laptop opened on the surface in front of her. Charcoal-tailored suit, fitted enough to read professional, plain enough to disappear. Hair in a tight regulation bun that nobody in the room thought to register because nobody in the room was looking at her hair. She had not moved since the debrief began. She had not looked up once in 40 minutes. She had the stillness of someone who had been specifically trained to have it, the way deep cover operators learn to be furniture in rooms that were watching everything else. Hearn paused. He smiled. He said what he said. He was 49 years old and held a full grade over anyone in this room with operational authority. And he delivered the line with the ease of a man who had never been required to pay for one like it. She typed 2 characters. She didn't look up. She didn't check the room, and the room was watching. All 32 faces rotating toward the back tier, with the reflex of people witnessing a superior single out a target. She didn't shift in her chair, clear her throat, or make any physical acknowledgement that the transmission had been received. 2 characters. Then nothing. The cursor blinked once. She returned to the document she had been reading. In 22 days inside the Bekaa Valley, she had learned that silence was not submission. Silence was collection. Every second you gave them nothing, you were banking data on what they did with it. She had been banking since 0830. A ripple moved through the tiered seats. Laughter broke in places, some of it genuine, some of it performed for the benefit of the man at the front, who was still smiling and still watching the back row to see what happened next. Coffee 6, a young captain in the first tier, looked down at his flight log and discovered something there that needed his complete attention. A staff major smirked openly with the practiced visibility of a man who needed the right person to see the smirk. 3 junior pilots in the second row exchanged a look that carried an entire silent conversation between them. They did not like this, and they were not going to say so, and they all understood that about each other. Nobody challenged Hearn. Institutional weight in a commanding officer's own COC, pressing down on everything beneath it until the room took the shape he needed it to take. Hearn held the pause 1 beat longer than he needed to, extracting full value from the silence. He had the ease of a man who had performed this particular move before, not always with the same words, not always in the same room, but always with the same outcome. The junior officer who laughed first got a small nod of acknowledgement. The ones who didn't laugh got nothing, which was its own kind of instruction. This was how authority maintained itself in small rooms, not through force, but through the daily calibration of who was worth a nod and who was not. He had been making those calculations for 19 years and had never paid a visible price for them. She was still looking at the laptop screen, 2 characters typed, the cursor blinking. Hearn turned back to the display wall and resumed the call sign roster as though the back row were already empty. Sergeant Major Augustus Bell stood at the left wall at parade rest. He was 56 years old and had been cataloging faces in rooms since before most of the people in these seats were commissioned, not because he was told to, but because it was a reflex now, as automatic as breathing, developed over 30 years of standing at the left wall of rooms exactly like this one. When Hearn delivered the line, Bell's eyes moved to the back row. He clocked the laptop. He clocked the 2-character response. Then he clocked something smaller, something that most people in the room would not have seen, even if they had been looking directly at her left hand. The face of her watch was turned to the inside of her wrist. Bell's jaw shifted 1 millimeter. He did not speak. He filed the observation under things he did not yet have a name for, and he went back to cataloging the room. He cataloged it the way he always did. Entry points first, then the chain of command by body language rather than rank insignia, then the people who were performing something for the room and the people who were simply in it. The woman in the back row fell into neither category. She was working. Not performing the act of working, actually working. The quiet, focused economy of someone who had something to do and was doing it, and had no interest in what the room thought about that. The contractor lanyard said she was a civilian analyst. The 2 characters said otherwise. Bell did not yet know what they said instead. He had a suspicion he was not yet willing to name. 12 minutes after the first insult, Hearn tested her again. He framed it as collegial, a man offering a junior colleague a chance to contribute. "Let's give our analyst a chance to weigh in," he said, delivering a warm look around the tiered seats first, making brief eye contact with his senior ops officer to set the expectations, before settling back on the woman in the contractor lanyard with the expression of someone who had already written the ending and was simply performing the setup. He was smiling when he said it. He was always smiling when he did this, because the smile was the mechanism. It told the room that what was about to happen was friendly, collegial, an invitation rather than an ambush, and that the woman in the back row was welcome to participate in her own diminishment without understanding what she was participating in. He invited her to explain the MV-22 Vortex ring state transition envelope, a parameter buried in the squadron's classified test card, a number with no authorized path to any post-action analyst who lacked operational flight clearance. He was 49 years old and a lieutenant colonel in his own squadron's COC, addressing a woman in a visitor badge with perhaps 5 years on her career by his estimate. He expected a pause. He expected hedging. He expected a footnote, and then a graceful retreat, and then the room moving on. She closed the laptop lid. She did not stand. 4 clauses, delivered without pause, without preamble, without a single softening word between them. 40 knots, 60 degrees, gross weight delta 2200. Your training profile is short by 8 knots. Every figure was exact, not approximate, not within range. Exactly, pulled from the classified test card without hesitation, without the slight upward inflection of a person checking their own confidence, without any of the verbal signals that marked a person working from memory rather than from direct operational knowledge. 12 words deployed the way a Marine deployed a breach charge, at the precise point, at the precise moment, with 0 wasted in the follow-through. Brevity was not a style. In the regiment, brevity was a discipline. It meant your words had already been counted, weighed and placed at the correct position for the correct effect. She had spoken 12 words. Every one of them landed like ordnance on a precise grid. Coffee 6 stiffened in the front row. The staff major's smirk disappeared mid-face, replaced by something uncertain and pale. A pen stopped moving in the second tier. Someone's chair creaked with the weight of a person leaning forward. The air in the room had changed temperature, and nobody in it could have explained why. Bell tilted his head, fractionally, the way a man tilted his head when a locked door opened without a key, and he had to decide whether to be surprised or not. He had seen that watch position before. 2022. A forward operating base during the Iron Lantern operational period, a location still on the classified register. A Marine raider element that never announced themselves wore their watches inward against the wrist bone and spoke in clauses short enough to fit on a radio burst. He had not gotten her name then. He was beginning to understand why not, and he was beginning to understand what that meant for the room he was currently standing in. He stood at the left wall for 7 more seconds. At the front of the room, Hearn was pivoting, the smile recalibrating, working to recover the initiative he had just lost in front of 32 people who had all heard the 12 words and were now doing arithmetic he could not control. Hearn was good at recovery. He had been recovering in front of rooms for 19 years. But 12 words from a classified test card didn't recover from. They sat in the room like a detonation that had already happened, and whatever Hearn said next would be said in the aftermath. Bell slipped out the COC side door and pressed a number he hadn't dialed in 3 years. The phone rang. He waited without moving. The break room at 0915 smelled of institutional coffee and the previous shift's breakfast. Someone had written, "Athena Girl," analyst in residence on the whiteboard above the coffee station in capital, letters large enough to read from the door. The handwriting that tried to look anonymous and fell short. 3 junior officers were clustered at the near counter when she entered, positioned with the studied casualness of people who intended to observe a specific reaction and preferred not to look like it. She read the whiteboard. She photographed it with her phone. She opened the small notebook from her left jacket pocket and wrote, "Time, location, 3 names, from memory," without looking at the men again. Her face was neutral throughout, the expression of someone reading a routine inventory. She poured her coffee. One of the junior officers, finding his moment, asked whether she had any thoughts on the technical exchange. She said, "Noted." 1 word. She carried her coffee back to her workstation. At 0930, Major Dennis Croft, Hearn's senior operations officer, stepped to the briefing podium and asked, in full voice, in front of 30 assembled personnel, whether the Athena Vector analyst could produce her DoD contractor certification number and security clearance scope for the operations record. The framing was meticulous. The intent was a public shakedown. A man asking a woman to empty her pockets before an audience to see if she would comply or break. Marek recited 8 digits from memory without looking up from the laptop. Croft wrote nothing down. The procedural case evaporated the moment it had served its theatrical function, and Croft returned to his seat with the posture of a man who had won something he wasn't sure was a prize. At 0955, Lance Corporal Denny Suarez, 19 years old, and assigned to Hearn's admin section, was handed a printed sign by Captain Randall Yates and directed to place it on the contractor's chair in the debrief room. The sign read, "Reserved, Athena Girl." Suarez looked at it. He looked at Yates. Yates looked back at him with the expression of a man who had delivered the order and considered his obligations fulfilled. Suarez carried the sign down the corridor and placed it on the seat. His expression was that of a young man who had been told the stove was off and suspected strongly that it wasn't, but had been given no authorized mechanism to say so. She passed him in the corridor as he finished placing it. She read the sign. She picked it up, photographed it, set it face down on the seat. She opened the notebook. Time, location, Suarez's name, Yates as the probable order giver. She did not speak to Suarez. She did not look at him with anything. He watched her walk back to her workstation, the notebook already closed, the pen already capped, and he had nothing to say. The debrief resumed at 10 o'clock. The sign had been face down on the seat since 0957, and the seat was empty. And Hearn did not mention it when the room settled back into order. He did not need to mention it. The room already knew what the sign meant. The room already knew the sign had been placed and found and dealt with without ceremony. And that piece of knowledge moved through the tiered seats quietly, in the way that information moved through a room that was watching the same thing and processing it differently. Coffee 6 looked at the empty seat in the back row for 3 seconds. Then he looked forward. Every entry in the notebook had a timestamp. Every timestamp was a link in a chain. She had been building chains since the Bekaa Valley. She understood exactly what they were for and precisely where they ended. If watching her absorb all of that in silence made your jaw clench, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be in the room when the door closes on him. Marek closed the notebook and looked up from her workstation. Her expression had not changed. Hearn moved from social hazing to bureaucratic leverage at 10:45. A base security NCO approached Marek in the COC lobby with apology already built into his posture. Professional, clearly operating under an order from above his comfort level, wanting her to know he was not personally the engine of what was happening. He requested her contractor badge. Credential flag, he said. Standard procedure. Her access was suspended pending review. He asked if she had any concerns. She said, timeline. One word. She surrendered the badge without additional comment and kept the laptop under her arm. Hearn informed the operations staff, within Marek's clear earshot, that the contractor had been asked to step out for procedural reasons. He was smiling, the particular smile of a man who believed the machinery had fully returned to his hands. The same machinery that had protected him across 3 commands and 2 MAGIFs for 11 years, without producing a consequence he had not managed to redirect. He was wrong about one thing. The contractor lanyard hanging from her neck was the only item in the building that was precisely what it appeared to be. In the squadron break room from 10 o'clock to 12:30, Marek worked. The JSOC issue collar pin camera on her lapel had been recording since 0800 hours. She cross-referenced encrypted maintenance records on the laptop, mapping the financial trail from Hassan Marwan's Iron Lantern logistics node through 3 shell contractor layers to the intermediary currently servicing Hearn's squadron. Transaction routing numbers, authorization signatures, timestamps on forms signed by officers now under federal investigation. The work did not pause because the room had changed. Rooms were only rooms. The data remained the data regardless of which room she was in. By 1100 hours, she had connected 4 separate contract modifications, each one individually within the range of routine administrative action, each one bearing the digital signature of the same logistics intermediary that Oni had flagged 18 months prior as a node in the surviving Iron Lantern finance network. Individually, they were unremarkable. Together, they formed a pattern that a reasonably senior attorney could walk into a federal courtroom and explain in 30 minutes to 12 civilians who had never heard of Hassan Marwan and did not know what the Bekaa Valley was. She added each connection to the running document, time-stamped and cited, and moved to the next. The break room was institutional beige and smelled of burned coffee from the previous shift. A motivational placard on the wall read, "Excellence in all we do." She noted that the poster was crooked by approximately 4 degrees and did not straighten it. She had stopped noting things that were not operationally relevant sometime in the first year after the Bekaa Valley, and 4 degrees of poster misalignment had no operational relevance. She kept working. At 12:15, Sergeant Major Bell passed the break room window on his way to the operations deck. He stopped. Through the glass. Merrick at the folding table, laptop open, left hand resting at the keyboard's edge. The slight forward lean of someone reading something that requires precision. And on her left wrist, the watch face turned inward against the wrist bone. Bell stood at the window for 6 full seconds. He had seen this before. 2022. Same operational period as Iron Lantern, a base whose name was still on the classified register. A Marine Raider element that wore their watches inward as a matter of field discipline. A habit burned in during SR operations, eliminating the glass flash risk, a reflex that became permanent after enough time in denied environments where a moment's reflection at the wrong instant was a lethal error. No civilian analyst wore a watch that way. No researcher wore a watch that way. An operator did. Specifically, an SR operator for whom the habit had become unconscious and irreversible, as automatic as the quadrant scan, as indelible as the clipped response. Bell did not enter the room. He filed it and kept walking, carrying new weight in his posture that the corridor cameras would not have been able to name. At 12:30, a temporary visitor pass was issued, and Marek was cleared back into the building. A sealed envelope, Marine Courier, delivered during her exclusion, sat beside her laptop case. She opened it, read it in a single pass, folded it once, placed it in the breast pocket of her jacket without any alteration of expression. Bell had enough. He had, if he was honest with himself, had enough since 12:15. At 1400 hours, he climbed the stairwell between floors in Building 2, out of sight of the duty desk and the corridor cameras, and dialed a number he hadn't used in 3 years. The line rang 3 times. On the 4th ring came a click and an open silence. Someone on the other end who answered without greeting and waited. Bell gave 3 data points: the watch, position, wrist. The inward-facing discipline of an SR operator, not a civilian affectation. The Vortex ring state answer: 4 clauses, 12 words, 0 hedge, every figure exact to the classified test card. And the 2 characters typed into the laptop during the opening insult. Burst acknowledgement, the specific shorthand of operators who measured transmissions by the syllable and used nothing superfluous. 3 data points, 60 seconds, no elaboration. There was a pause on the other end that lasted longer than pauses usually lasted from this particular contact. Then, if she's who I think she is, walk away from it. Tell nobody in that building. Bell asked one question. The contact said, "Don't ask me that question." The line closed. Bell returned to the operations deck at 14:30 and stood at the COC doorway and watched her work for 60 seconds. He saw what he should have identified hours earlier. He saw it with the specific clarity of a man who had been given a key and was now looking at the lock it opened. His contact's exact words: "If she's who I think she is." Bell had not asked who his contact thought she was. He had not been invited to ask, and he had been in this business long enough to understand the shape of the spaces around the things he was not invited to ask. But he could read the shape of the space. He had been reading shapes like that since before the lieutenant colonel, currently laughing with his adjutant across the operations deck, had pinned on his first gold bar. She was scanning the room by quadrants. Every 90 seconds, without turning her head, without any perceptible shift in posture, her eyes moved through the room in a precise sequence. North wall, east wall, south wall, west wall, logging entries and exits, updating the face inventory, running pattern of life collection on a room she had been in for 8 hours. The way SR operators burned this into their nervous systems over years of field work until it became involuntary, as automatic as drawing breath. A post-action analyst did not scan a conference room by quadrants on a 90-second cycle. A researcher with a contractor lanyard did not do it. An operator who had spent enough time running pattern of life in places where a missed face had immediate kinetic consequences did it, and could not stop doing it, and probably could not have explained to a civilian why her eyes moved the way they moved. Belle had spent a career learning the difference between someone who was trained and someone who was made. The woman in the charcoal suit had been working this room since 0830. She had not missed a face, a door, or a shift change in 8 hours of continuous observation. She was 30 years old. She was the most dangerous person in this building by a margin that was not close. Across the operations deck, Hearn reviewed a brief with his adjutant, laughing at something. He was relaxed. He believed the morning had gone well. He had no idea what Belle had just been told not to ask about, and Belle wasn't going to tell him. Belle stood in the doorway for a long moment. He had spent 30 years watching Marine officers, good ones and bad ones, careful ones and careless ones, the ones who built the Corps and the ones who fed on it, and he had learned to read the difference the way a doctor read a film. What he was reading now, across the operations deck, was a man who had spent 11 years building something he believed was watertight, and who did not yet know that someone had been inside the foundation for 7 months, with a light and a camera and a notebook full of time-stamped entries. Belle did not warn him. He made that decision not with his mouth, but with the stillness that settled into his posture, like something permanently locked into place. And he walked back to the operations deck and resumed his post. At 14:45, a junior officer found Belle in the corridor and reported that the contractor situation was under control. Belle looked at the junior officer with the patience of a man who had been burying his Marines since before this lieutenant was commissioned. He said nothing. The junior officer found somewhere else to be. Belle stood at the door and watched the operations deck for another 30 seconds, and then he watched the break room window, and then he watched the clock, and then he did what senior enlisted have always done in rooms full of things moving toward a conclusion they could not stop. He waited. Subscribe to Honor Tales. What the watcher just heard on that phone is the reason she walked into this base in the first place. After 1800 hours, the COC emptied for shift change. Marek was given access to the visiting consultant office, windowless folding table, a government-issue chair, a wall clock ticking in a rhythm fractionally off, as though it was keeping time for a different room somewhere else. She locked the door. This was the only moment in 31 hours that the camera went inside her head. Behind the laptop's battery plate, a photograph, folded at the center, the crease worn soft from 4 years of handling. She did not fully unfold it. She knew the faces. Captain John Reyna, WRAITH 11. Gunnery Sergeant Ivor Bowes, WRAITH 12. She allowed herself exactly what she always allowed, long enough to remember, short enough to continue, and then she folded it back into place. The Marine Raider Challenge coin was worn at one edge from 4 years of daily contact. MARSOC Trident and Anchor on one face, a date on the other. March 2022. She had been 25 years old when that date happened. She was 30 now. The coin had not gotten lighter. The Bekaa Valley came back in fragments. It always moved that way, non-sequential, arriving sideways, the way operational memory arrived when you stopped pressing it. The cold of the valley at 0300 hours. A cold that was somehow also green, somehow wrong, in a way she had spent 4 years not finding words for. The radio silence that meant the exfil had gone bad before anyone had said it had. Reyna's voice on the net, once, clipped and professional, and recognizably his, and then static, and then nothing where his voice had been. Bowes moved on angles to cover Ferreira, while Ferreira bled through a tourniquet she had placed with her left hand, in the dark, at a dead run, without slowing. 9 kilometers to the MV-22 extract. She had counted every one. She was 25 years old. She had not stopped counting. The Silver Star ceremony was in a room without windows, 18 months after the Bekaa. A flag officer she had never met pinned the ribbon and said, "Your country thanks you," and left within 4 minutes. The citation was classified. She was 27 years old. The 2 people who should have been standing beside her were on the ground at Arlington. 4 people attended. She did not know 3 of their names. They did not know hers officially, because officially this room was not happening, and this ribbon was not being pinned to a uniform that was not present. The coin was the only ceremony she kept, the only one that remembered what a ceremony was supposed to mean. Raina had laughed when they gave her the call sign. "WRAITH 10 sounds like a ghost," he said. She told him that was the point. She did not correct him when he turned out to be right. Bose had never commented on the call sign. Bose commented on very few things. He had been a gunnery sergeant for 4 years when he joined the element, and he had the Geisach's particular economy with language. He said what needed saying in exactly the number of words it required, and withheld the rest as something private and irreversible. She had tried to learn this from him. She thought she had gotten somewhere close. She thought he would have said so if she hadn't, because he was not a man who withheld operational assessments. She did not carry the dead to remember them. She carried them because she was not done with what they had started. She opened the secure message channel. 1 line from her handler, time-stamped 4 hours earlier. "Marwan is at the Trieste passenger port. Humant confirms slip E7. The window is closing, W." She closed the laptop. She was not here only for Hearn. She was here because Hearn's network was the surviving arm of the Iron Lantern finance cell, the money that had diverted maintenance contracts, degraded her element's support chain, and put 3 Marine pilots into the North Carolina ground in October 2025. She was here because their families had been told it was pilot error. She was here because the man who funded the mechanism that killed them was eating dinner in Trieste, while a Carabinieri warrant was 48 hours from service. She stood. She locked the drawer. She turned back to the folding table and the work and what came next. At 0:15 hours on May 8th, Captain Randall Yates placed 3 printed documents in a manila envelope in his adjutant's office, sealed it, and handed it to Lance Corporal Denny Suarez with specific instructions. Use your admin keycard. Access the visiting consultant office. Place the envelope in the contractor's open work bag. Standard security protocol check. Suarez was 19 years old and had learned that the Marine Corps had reasons for things and that the appropriate response was compliance. He asked why a security protocol check happened at 0:15 hours. Yates told him not to ask that. 1 floor below, a single-word alert reached Marek's secondary device. Inbound. She did not reply. She had the live feed from the collar pin camera open on the device's screen, the timestamp running in the lower corner of the frame, the break room folding table cold and still around her. Suarez used his keycard at 0:23. He entered the visiting office. The room was dim. Folding table, government chair, the jacket hanging on the chair's back with a small silver pin on the lapel. He placed the manila envelope in the open work bag precisely as directed. He paused. His eyes moved to the jacket, then to the pin. A small thing. Silver. No marking he recognized. He did not know it was a JSOC-issue collar pin camera that had been recording continuously for 19 hours. He left. The door latched behind him. The timestamp in the corner of Marek's screen read 0:23:41. She opened a secure channel and typed 3 words. Probable cause confirmed. No punctuation. No context. The federal team had everything it needed. She closed the device. She set it on the table. For the first time in 31 hours, she allowed herself a smile. Small, private. The expression of a person who has waited for a specific door to give way and has just heard the latch. At 0:31, Hearn walked the corridor from his office to the duty desk, coffee in hand, brief in the other. He passed the break room window. He glanced in. He saw her, the contractor, the woman he had spent 31 hours methodically reducing. alone at a folding table with a device in her hands, smiling at something on its screen. He stood at the window for 3 seconds. He told himself it meant nothing. He did not entirely believe himself. He kept walking. The corridor outside the break room was empty at 0:31 hours. The duty desk was 40 meters ahead, lit by the blue glow of the display screens cycling through overnight status information. Hearn reached it and set his coffee down, and looked at the brief in his hand, and thought about the morning command briefing at 0700. He had it structured. The credential issue, the discovered documents, the formal request for contractor removal on the grounds of a security discrepancy. 6 minutes, if the MP at the door did his part correctly. He had done harder things in 6 minutes. He would close it out before breakfast. He did not think about the smile. He thought about it for a moment, and then decided not to think about it. He picked up his coffee and walked back toward his office, and told himself the morning was already over. She had let him reach for it. Let him pick it up. Let him carry it across the threshold and place it in her bag with his own hands. In special reconnaissance, you did not move on a target the moment you located it. You waited until it was committed. Then you closed. She had been waiting since 0800 hours the previous morning. She had 23 hours and 41 minutes of recording and a 3-word confirmation already transmitted to a federal team. She had slept 3 hours on the folding table. She had not stopped working. The morning command briefing convened at 0700 in the main conference room. 31 Marines, 2 Naval Safety Center liaisons, 1 civilian contractor in a charcoal suit at the far end of the table. Hearn chaired it. An MP stood at the door, positioned to escort the contractor out. At the moment, Hearn had calculated to be approximately 7 minutes into the briefing. He had a plan, and he was comfortable with it. He had been comfortable with plans for 19 years. He opened with practiced authority, a lieutenant colonel in his own house, with his own staff, addressing a problem he had already solved. He presented the discovery. 3 maintenance documents, found in the contractor's work bag during a routine security review, bearing data signatures inconsistent with legitimate analytical work. He asked Marek to explain the discrepancy. He was still smiling when he said it. She did not stand. She slid a CIA-cleared DoD PIV card across the table to the credentialing terminal at the room's network station and said nothing. The scanner processed it. A 3-tone alert sounded, a sound that most people in the room associated only with classified access training scenarios, had never heard live, and would not forget. Now, the alert pinged simultaneously to the MARSOC J2, the Naval Safety Center director, and a JSOC duty officer, whose name did not appear on any organizational chart visible to anyone in this room. 3 screens on the room's network flagged a single identity classification: MAJA USMC WIS MSOR. The MP at the door stopped moving. She had placed the card without a word. She did not explain what it was. She let the system speak for her, because the system spoke with authority. No word she could have chosen would have matched. In the silence that followed the 3-tone alert, Sergeant Major Augustus Bell rose from his chair at the side of the room with a single fluid motion and came to parade rest. His voice was full of command volume in a room that had gone completely still. "WRAITH 10, ma'am." He rendered a formal salute and held it without tremor. 31 Marines watched. None of them moved. The room had a specific quality of silence in it. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of 31 people simultaneously understanding that they had been in the presence of something they had completely misread, and were now processing that error in real time, each of them arriving at the same calculation from a different starting point. Coffee 6, in the front tier, was thinking about the vortex ring state answer, the 12 words, the classified test card figures, the way she had delivered them without standing up. The staff major, 3 rows back, was thinking about the smirk he had let Hearn see that morning, and doing a rapid assessment of what that smirk had just been recorded as meaning. 3 junior pilots who had exchanged that look 24 hours ago were thinking about what they had and had not said out loud. Bell held the salute, eyes forward, expressionless, and waited. Hearn's face ran the full cycle in under 10 seconds. Confusion. The call sign meant nothing to him yet. Disbelief. The card was real. The scanner was real. Bell had 20 years in this corps and did not salute contractors. Recognition arriving in pieces. The Vortex ring state answer. 12 words and 0 hedge. Every figure exact to the classified test card. The burst acknowledgement typed into the laptop during the title insult. 2 characters. MSOR shorthand. The operational brevity of someone for whom every transmission was measured. The woman smiling in the break room at 0:31. Horror closing the sequence. The collar pin camera on the lapel. The federal team. The sealed envelope she had placed in her breast pocket without expression. The 3 families told for 7 months it was pilot error. A major from the Marine Special Operations Regiment. 30 years old. 51 minutes after the PIV card hit the scanner, an MV-22 Osprey set down on the Squadron 28 flight line. Brigadier General Talia Vance, MARSOC Deputy Commander, walked across the flight deck, flanked by an ONI senior agent and a Department of Justice trial counsel, carrying a sealed federal warrant. In front of 200 Marines assembled at the line, Brigadier General Vance rendered a formal salute to Major Alexandra Marek. Marek returned at once, crisp, no extra movement. Then she turned to the ONI agent at her right and gave one short order. "Secure the records." Hearn was under arrest before the MV-22's rotors stopped turning. 200 Marines watched a brigadier general salute a 30-year-old woman in a charcoal suit. Some of them had laughed 30 hours earlier when a lieutenant colonel called her sweetheart, and the room had moved with him. Nobody was laughing now. Marek's eyes tracked Hearn across the flight line as the MPs moved him toward the vehicle. Steady, unhurried, the same eyes that had counted 9 kilometers in the dark, and then returned to the report on the table in front of her. She had one more order to give before the morning was over. She stepped to the ONI agent's right and spoke 4 words to the DOJ trial counsel. 3 families, corrected record. The counsel nodded. He knew what she meant. He had read the brief, he had the file. The record had been wrong for 7 months, and it would take the remainder of the day to begin making it right. And that would have to be enough, because it was what was possible, and she had learned a long time ago to focus on what was possible. The Hearn network did not unravel slowly. Operations under collection for 7 months did not fail gradually. They failed the way pressure vessels failed, all at once, and faster than anyone who had not watched the pressure build could anticipate. The data Marek had assembled across 31 hours in the COC and the break room and the visiting consultant office was not a story that needed to be told in sequence. It was a structure, a complete architecture of diverted funds, falsified records, and institutional complicity that collapsed as a unit when the first load-bearing element was removed. Hearn was the element. Everything else followed. That was how networks failed when they were built on a single person's ability to keep moving parts in motion. When the person stopped moving, the parts stopped with him. Naval Safety Center attorneys and DOJ trial counsel filed federal charges within 24 hours. 6 officers across 2 Marine air-ground task forces were indicted. Captain Randall Yates's name appeared on the document below Hearn's, a pairing neither man would have believed possible a week prior. Hearn's booking photograph showed a man in a civilian intake jumpsuit standing in the space where service alphas had always been, his eyes carrying the particular flatness of someone who had not yet finished processing what had happened. The Department of Justice froze $29 million in diverted maintenance contracts in under 48 hours. The Defense Logistics Intermediary's federal charter was revoked. Its principals were subpoenaed within hours of the revocation order. ONI traced the Iron Lantern financial through-line from its origin to its surviving network nodes and published the full chain in a classified brief. Hearn's diversion operation was the surviving arm of the same finance cell, whose courier's ledger Marek had fixed for the JSOC strike in March 2022. The dead did not stay buried in bureaucracies. The paper trail was too long and too specific, and too many people had signed their names to it. A Marine casualty notification officer visited 3 homes in 3 states. The letter he carried was from the Naval Safety Center, addressed to each family by name. It corrected the official record. The October 2025 training mishap at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point had been caused by deliberately undertrained maintenance protocols resulting from safety funds diverted through a fraudulent logistics intermediary. Not pilot error. The 3 pilots had performed correctly and died because the aircraft beneath them had been allowed to degrade. One family did not answer the door for 4 minutes. When it opened, the Marine on the step was already holding his cover in both hands. Lance Corporal Denny Suarez sat in an NCIS interview room for 6 hours. He was 19 years old. He had enlisted at 17 on a parental waiver because the Marine Corps had seemed like a place where someone would tell you what the right thing to do was, and all you had to do was do it. He had placed an envelope in a bag because his captain told him to, and he had told himself the captain understood the purpose, and he had half believed it. The half he hadn't believed had been sitting in the room with him for 6 hours without a name. When the NCIS agent slid a formal statement across the table, Suarez looked at it for a long moment. He thought about the woman who picked up the sign he placed on her chair, photographed it, put it face down, and said nothing to him. No threat, no anger, just the open notebook and the pen writing his name with a timestamp. He picked up the pen. He signed. If you stayed all the way to the salute, subscribe. There's another mission queued for tomorrow, and the next operator is already in the room. A classified briefing room, location unspecified. Intelligence summary on a wall screen, time-stamped and flagged priority. Hassan Marwan, surviving lieutenant of the Iron Lantern finance cell and the network's actual financial processing layer, had slipped his mooring at Trieste passenger port at 0341 local time. 19 minutes before the Carabinieri warrant team arrived at slip E7, the screen showed the dock in full daylight, a port camera still image, open water, a cleat with no line attached, empty space where a vessel had been that morning. One analyst said quietly into the silence, 19 minutes. Nobody responded. The screen remained up for a long time after she said it. 19 minutes was a very specific number. It was the kind of number that implied foreknowledge, not luck. It implied a network still functioning below the level at which the arrests had landed, a layer of communication still operational in the gap between the Hearn indictments and the warrant service. Somewhere between the moment the federal charges were filed in Cherry Point and the moment the Carabinieri reached slip E7 in Trieste, a word had moved faster than the warrant. The analysts in the room knew what that meant. The screen stayed up because sometimes the only thing you could do for 19 minutes was look at them. They said it was pilot error. For 7 months, 3 families believed it and arranged their grief around that belief and learned to live inside a version of what happened that was false. On the 73rd day after Marek's arrival at Cherry Point, the Marine Corps corrected the record. It did not bring anyone back. It was still the only thing the living could do for the dead, close the distance between what had been said and what had been true, however long the closing took. 3 weeks after the morning command briefing, on a late afternoon in a vast military cemetery, the light flat and gold across the grass, Marek walked a specific row until she found what she was looking for. 2 markers, side by side, Captain John Reyna, Gunnery Sergeant Ivor Bowes. She stood the way she always stood, squared, still, eyes forward, for exactly the time she always allowed herself. No more. Then she placed the worn Marine Raider Challenge coin in the grass between the two stones. The edge was smooth where her thumb had always found it. She was 25 when they died. She is 30 now. She stepped back. Her phone vibrated. She read the screen. One line, no greeting, no sign-off. WRAITH is still tracking. Marwan is in Trieste. She read it twice. She pocketed the phone. She looked at the coin in the grass between the two names for 3 more seconds, the late light finding the worn edge of the metal. She had carried him out on her back. She had carried all of them, the living and the dead, across 9 kilometers and 4 years, and one more investigation that needed finishing because the people who started it could not finish it themselves. She was 30 years old. She was not done yet. WRAITH was still tracking. She turned and walked away from the stones, and the camera held on the coin in the grass, and the 2 names, and the late afternoon light slowly fading until the frame went dark. The coin was worn at one edge. It would be there in the morning and the morning after that, in all weather, through all seasons, until the cemetery's grass grew around it, or someone found it and understood what it was, or didn't. It was the only ceremony she could give them, now that didn't require paperwork, or a classified citation, or a room without windows. It was the only one that meant what she needed it to mean. I was here, and I am still going, and we are not finished yet. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.